Hey guys, so today we are going to be using a new streaming service known as OBS Studio to display my projects, or my videos on the Silver Gold Kidz channel. So, our story today is about 1775 to 1865 in America. These crucial years took the U.S. straight from debt, extreme debt, and collapse. Literally, it was really close to collapse, to economic prosperity, industrial advancement, and its status as a world leader. So we started out here in 1770s, where America has started battling the British during this time. My birds are very popular. So the British have attacked multiple parts of the 13 colonies, mainly Massachusetts, and the Americans, under the Continental Congress, have formed what is now known as the Continental Army, led by future President George Washington. Right, look at it. It's right there. Anyway, where was I? So, the Continental Army has been created with Washington, our future president, as the commander-in-chief. So, as we go on, Washington's troops suffer multiple casualties, mass casualties, mainly during the year 1776, which was a crucial year in the American Revolution, and also the turning point in the American Revolution. During this time, there were multiple incidents, also known, one of them was known as Valley Forge, when Washington's troops camped in the area known as Valley Forge in Pennsylvania for a 6-month time to escape the British and to settle in, just quiet down. However, this was it was very bad for the Continental Army during that time because it suffered one of the biggest casualties in the army during that time in America. After that happened, America, as you know, during early July to August, drafted what is now known as a Declaration of Independence for the United States of America. It drafted that, and it was signed and ratified by the end of the year. So this was a huge act of treason by the colonies. Literally, they declared that, okay, we're not going to listen to you anymore, Britain. We're done. We're gone. Okay, we don't like you anymore. Okay, so we're not going to remain a part of you. We declare independence. So, after that happened, after America declared independence, Britain's King George III thought of this as an act of violation toward the crown, and again, this sparked an even greater battle in the colonies during the time. So we know what happened, right? We know what happened at the end of the American Revolution. So I'm just gonna skip along that part. Battles. I'm done with the battles. Are you done with the battles? I'm just done with the battles. So, as you know, at the end of the war, Jamestown was a crucial city in which, I believe it was Jamestown. Jamestown was a crucial city in which American troops surrounded the entire British Army, led by Sir Cornwallis. It completely devastated the army. The French blockaded the rivers, so it couldn't escape. The Navy couldn't help it. It was completely blocked, and therefore Cornwallis surrendered, and that was the biggest defeat for Britain in the war. And after that, there were a couple of minor battles after that. However, that was the main end of the revolution. And a couple of years later, the Treaty of Paris was signed. The second Treaty of Paris, not the one for the French and Indian War, the one after that. That was signed, and yeah, so America gained land east of the Mississippi River, and it gained all of that land. The colonies were now states, and now they could form their own government. Everything was happy and amazing and great, right? No, it was horrible. So you could see that France had actually helped the U.S. a lot during that time period. And it helped the U.S. a lot. It had sent troops, it had sent money, because France was a great rival of Great Britain during the time, and still is actually. So what they did was that they paid a lot of money to the U.S. and the U.S. was in debt. They couldn't pay anything back. They had no resources. They were just trying to country out of a war, and they had lost most of its men. And had a really big issue in terms of how to pay back its debt. Every state was in debt. Okay, so what the delegates did during the American Revolution, drafted a constitution to which they would abide for, and people would abide by. So these articles stated that the states and the people had greater power in the government than the central government itself. And this was due to the fact that King George III literally ruled Britain. It wasn't controlled by states, it was controlled by King George III and his parliament, the central government. And this put fear into the American people that we don't want a central government. What if the king or the president, as it's known now, would just take over and declare a dictatorship, which Adolf Hitler did in the next 200, after 150 years. But that's not the point. So what they did was that they drafted a constitution, which is known as the Articles of Confederation, and declared that states have more power. The government doesn't. The central government doesn't. And that was a big problem, which resulted in many rebellions and many issues. So one example in the flaws of the articles was that one really bad thing, and the states had exclusive rights. They had rights that right now you go like, what? That doesn't make sense at all back then. Well, it did kind of, but then they messed up really badly. So what they did was that states did not have to pay the central government tax at all. The central government could request tax, but they didn't necessarily have to get it. And states printed their own currency. They did lots of things because they were battling inflation. In order to battle inflation back then, they created multiple currencies, so every state had different currency. That was a problem, because every time you left a state, you had to switch your currency, it kept on switching your currency, and that was horrible. That was just terrible. So why would anybody do that? So then the same people and a couple more who signed and created the Declaration, came together again and said, okay, we're going to make an act of treason again, for the second time now, against our own government, and we're going to edit these articles, okay? Because they knew there were problems. Many of them thought that, okay, there are problems, we're not going to, rip it up and, do something. We're not going to, rip it up and burn it and throw it in the trash and write something new. Well, that was exactly what they did. So they rewrote the whole articles, named it the Constitution, put a big stamp on it, and signed it. So that was the end of the Constitution. And the Constitution had a lot of changes. Many of them were honorable, but one was very controversial during the time, and that was the fact that the Constitution did not abolish slavery. And that was an issue, a real issue, because slaves were considered property back then, and the North was, they were like anti-slavery. I'll just say anti-slavery because they still profited off slavery back then, but not as much as the South did. So the original declaration actually stated that we would get rid of slavery, but they didn't, because one Southern delegate declared that their state wouldn't sign the declaration if Jefferson, who wrote the declaration, wouldn't get rid of this line. So Jefferson had no choice, because in order to ratify the declaration, they needed a unanimous vote from all of the states, all of the colonies. They needed approval from all of the colonies in order to go forward with it. So Jefferson was like, okay, fine, whatever, I'll do it. I'm sorry. And he cut off that line, and that was the end of that. So then, again, the articles denounced slavery. But then they had to repeal that again, so imagine how ironic that was. So the Constitution now said that central government will have more rights than the states. There'll be a strong central government, less state power, but they would keep slavery, and that was a big issue, because then, which happened later in the 19th century, the Civil War happened. So great for that. They made a big mistake. But anyway, so as we continue on, there's a Constitution. People don't know their rights in the Constitution. So look, there's another big problem. I have to talk for another 10 minutes about this now. So the big problem about this Constitution was that people did not know what their rights were, and that was a huge issue. And this really created two separate parties of the United States. One was known as the Federalist, and one was known as the Anti-Federalist. And these two parties were the first political parties of the U.S. So the Federalists believed that, okay, yeah, our Constitution's great, we just love it. Okay, the Articles of Confederation were trash. Okay, we hated it. The Anti-Federalists support the Constitution, but they hate the fact that there is no Bill of Rights. And every state had their own Bill of Rights, so they thought, like, why can't we make one? So then what they did 2 years later was that they made a Bill of Rights, which stated the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Let's see the first one and this last one. So the first one stated that that people had the freedom of religion, press, petition, speech, and assembly, and multiple others. And the 10th Amendment stated the rights of the people, the rights of the state was the 9th Amendment. So that's what happened in the Bill of Rights. They wrote 10 amendments stating what people could do, what people could not do. In the Constitution, there were rights of the accused. Amendment 5 were criminals, not prosecuted criminals, but accused criminals would have certain rights to go with their case. One of them being the right to an attorney, the right to have witnesses at a trial, the right to a jury. So that was that. But there were still two parties. There had to be two parties. There had to be opposing sides. So those two opposing sides became the Anti-Federalists, led by, guess who? Thomas Jefferson led the Anti-Federalists. So the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists. The Federalists were run by Alexander Hamilton. That's right, Alexander Hamilton. So now we're just going to branch out from the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists, and we're going to take these two men who were iconic figures during the time, and we're going to take them and we're going to analyze them and their ideologies. So Hamilton believed that America should go forward as a country of the elites, not the common man. And that was exactly the opposite of what Jefferson thought. Jefferson thought that the common man should have the most power in the government, while Hamilton thought that the elite should have the most power in the government, and that was an issue again. So Hamilton also believed that America should go forward as a industrial society, and Jefferson believed it would go forward as an agricultural society, meaning farms, stuff like that. While Jefferson hated the idea of industry. He thought, no, we're a country of small farmers. So back then, Jefferson was rather correct in thinking that America was an agricultural society. But look who went out in the 21st century. Yeah, that's right. It's Hamilton, not Jefferson. So these two people created parties. They didn't create parties. They were leaders of their party. And then Hamilton was shot and killed by his rival known as Aaron Burr, and that was the end of Hamilton. So great ending. Anyway, for Jefferson, he went on to become Secretary of State, and Hamilton was Secretary of the Treasury for both of them for George Washington, who was a supposed Federalist back then. And that was where both Hamilton's and Jefferson's rivalry came up. So at the end of that, Jefferson became president. He served as an anti-federalist, which then became known as the Democratic Republicans. And as we go on, we'll change their name again. So Democratic Republicans became a party, and then Jefferson, after he became president and went down as president, he died on July 4th. Just with a 5-hour difference from John Adams' death. What a coincidence. They died on their nation's birthday, and they died on the same day, and they were both founding fathers, so I guess, I don't know what happened. But anyway, so we go forward, and we have multiple presidents. James Monroe, the Monroe Doctrine, which stated that countries could not trade with the U.S., which was a big issue. Because the U.S. did not have much to trade with. That was the thing. Britain was like, okay, fine, we'll not use you. We don't need you. Okay, we don't need you or anybody else. We'll use other people. We don't need you. And same thing with France and other countries. And that proves disastrous for the nation. And then they repealed it shortly after. If only he had become president about 50 years later, and then that would have had more of an effect on other nations, but no, he wasn't. So great for that. Also, there was a War of 1812, which actually didn't last in 1812. It lasted until 1813, where the British, let's remember that, the British, after the American Revolution, did not leave the New World. They were up in Canada. Since the U.S. gained all land east of the Mississippi and above Spanish Florida and below Canada, the British were still in Canada. Right? So, since they were still in Canada, America, so they invaded. They waited for the exact time they had to invade, and they burned the White House down, and, but still they lost. So, wow. They have really bad fortune. Anyway, so, after the War of 1812, after Andrew Jackson came in, and, he is a forerunner of the current Democratic Party of the United States of America right now. So he conducted the Trail of Tears. He conducted multiple deportations and deportations of Native Americans back then. And they were sent to camps. They were sent to the reservations. And this is why it's called Trail of Tears. They had to walk miles. They had to march miles. And most of them died during that period, so I bet most of them hated Jackson. Yet, he is known today as one of the most prestigious presidents of that time. So, look at that. Anyway, so we go into an era where the North and the South have bigger issues than ever before. So, you know Lincoln, right? Abraham Lincoln. So he is elected president after the election of him and Stephen Douglas. So he is elected president, but the same year he's elected president, and by the way, he did not get a single vote from the South. The same year he's elected president, South Carolina secedes from the Union or the United States of America. So, after the Union seceded, after South Carolina seceded, it was followed by multiple countries, multiple states, what am I saying? And, there was a big issue, and that resulted in the Civil War, where there was the Unions and the Confederates fighting each other. So, so the Civil War had started, and it would be the biggest, I'm not lying, the biggest, one of the, in percentage-wise, it would be the one of the biggest casualties in American history in terms of percent, not population. So there were multiple battles that were extremely important during the Civil War. One of them, most notably, being the Battle of Gettysburg. So Southern troops led by Robert E. Lee, had marched to Gettysburg in Pennsylvania, and they assumed that nobody was in there, nobody would be in there. But in reality, Union troops were there. They were camped there. And when they met, it would result in one of the biggest losses for the Confederates and a turning point in the war itself. And Abraham Lincoln delivered his Gettysburg Address 7 years ago as it started. By the way, score is 20. And 87 years, 20 times 4 is 80, plus 7, 87 years back was drafted. So, 7 years ago was probably Lincoln's most famous address as his term as president. And so he and his Congress issued 3 major amendments to the Constitution, abolishing slavery, declaring that pre-slave citizens, now citizens, would have the right to vote. They had all the rights of a white person. But still, there were the Jim Crow laws, which meant that whites and blacks were separated. So now we end in 1865. Lincoln is assassinated after the Confederates lost. He is shot in the head by John Wilkes Booth while he was watching a play, a theater. I think it's a play. I'm not sure about that. He is shot by John Wilkes Booth before the ratification of the 13th Amendment, and he dies. And there is the end of that. And that is the end of our video right there. So thank you, and this is OBS Studio for Silver Globe Kids News Channel. Thank you, and please subscribe to our channel and like it as much as you want. Thank you so much.